And welcome, everyone. We saw from the attendee list that many of you are joining from around the world. So good morning, afternoon, evening. We appreciate your time, and we're glad you could make it here regardless of the time difference. So every year at VitalMetrics, we make sure to measure our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We reduce where we can, and we offset where we cannot. So we're happy to say that we are carbon neutral, and that includes this webinar today. And I think I'd like to start by just describing a report that I came across recently. It was published by McKinsey in 2015. It did a survey of the global 250 largest companies in the world, and it found that a majority of those organizations were reporting scope 1 and 2 emissions, but scope 3 is really lagging. So really just echoing sort of the intro that Reagan gave, really focusing on scope 3 is really a new frontier and where we really feel movement in the industry is heading. So I am Kathy T. Rose, Principal Consultant at VitalMetrics Group. So I'll kick off our call today describing what is Scope 3 and why is it important. Summer Brooke Smith, our Head of CDP Services at VitalMetrics, will provide a tool demo. So you'll be able to see the tool itself, its functionality, and its capabilities. And we'll close out with our process. So if you decide to go with us and work with us using this tool, what would the process look like? How would we help you enable disclosure to CDP in a timely fashion? My colleague Whitney Reyes, a project associate at VitalMetrics, will be presenting that and also proctoring the questions that we have at the end. So feel free to put any questions that you have in the panel to the right, and we'll address all of those, as many as we can, about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation. If you haven't heard of VitalMetrics before, we are an award-winning sustainability consultancy founded in 2005. Our 3 core capabilities really lie in advanced lifecycle assessment science, best quality impact data that is commercially viable, and really leveraging information technology in order to bring those calculations and data to a broader set of constituents, organizations, more quickly, effectively, and efficiently. Our global client base includes Fortune 500 companies, as well as government agencies and nonprofit organizations, and we are a climate change consultancy partner of CDP. So just very briefly, what is Scope 3? So this image is taken from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So Scope 1 encompasses on-site generation and the emissions resulting from company facilities and their operation, company vehicles, things of that nature. Scope 2 emissions are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with your purchased energy, so electricity or heat. And Scope 3 encompasses all the other indirect emissions associated with the whole life cycle of bringing good or product to service. So that encompasses upstream activities. An example of an upstream activity would be business travel or employee commuting, and downstream activities. So an example of a downstream activity is use of sold products. So a laptop you might be watching this webinar on is using electricity. That electricity would be classified as use of a sold product, the use of your laptop. Before we dig into the content, we'd like to take a very quick poll. Is your organization reporting Scope 3 emissions this year? So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the polling question, and we'll just take a few seconds here to allow everyone to respond. All right, so now that the poll has ended, you can see the results on the right. So the vast majority did not answer. I'll just take that as a maybe, maybe indecisive, unsure. A small percent saying yes, and an even smaller percent saying no. So possibly a lot of you out there are really considering Scope 3. We're really happy to have you here to see what the tool capabilities are and how it may help you. So as Reagan mentioned, it's funny, Reagan, I'm mentioning that same study that on average, Scope 3 emissions or supply chain emissions are 4 times greater than those of direct operations. Another study done in 2013 came to that same conclusion. Their one caveat was actually for the use of sold products. So if your product consumes energy during the use phase, that might not be the case really, but in either, either way you look at it, Scope 3 really is the area that we want to pay attention to now and going forward. So CDP is increasing their emphasis on Scope 3 through their Reimagining disclosure initiative. So this initiative is aimed at 3 things. So increasing the relevancy to external stakeholders, that includes investors, so giving them information that is relevant to what they're looking for and the questions that they may be asking. Optimizing the process, so have it be more streamlined and take less time to go through the disclosure process with CDP. And third, focusing on high impact areas. So Scope 3 is really a high impact area. And if you are part of one of these higher impact sectors, such as agriculture, materials, energy, and transportation, that will definitely be the case for you this year. So you'll see more questions really targeting Scope 3 activities. And the goal here is really to have reporting be more representative of reality. So we know that Scope 3 encapsulates most of emissions, but unfortunately with the reporting and disclosure, the focus has been on 1 and 2. So CDP does have a goal for Scope 3 to encapsulate over 40% of all reported emissions, and that just basically means that they'd want to move towards something that's more realistic of what's actually going on in the world. So if we break down the Scope 3 categories, as I said earlier, they can be categorized as upstream or downstream. Upstream is to the left here. So in addition to things like business travel or employee commuting, purchased goods and services is another area that is classified as upstream. So the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the acquisition, processing of different types of materials that you may need for your business, that would be under the purchased goods and services category and classified as upstream. For downstream, we have processing of sold products. So if you're just producing wire, for instance, and it goes into some other products down the line, processing of sold products would be more the activities of that other organization. The use of the sold products, so a car is another example, and the use of fuel, end-of-life treatment of sold products, so how that product is disposed of, whether it's recycled, composted, landfilled, incinerated for energy, things like that. That is quantified in that category under downstream. So as you can see, there are many Scope 3 categories, 15 in total, and they comprise the majority of categories of the 18 total in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And one thing to mention here, too, that I think is interesting is that these categories are equally weighted by CDP. So looking at these categories and thinking about how your organization may report on them now or in the future can really help you with your disclosure and improve your chances of increasing your score. So now that's just an overview of Scope 3, what it is, why it's important, some of the categories. I'd like to hand it off now to my colleague, Summer Brooks-Smith, who will give a little bit more about our tool and then the demo. Summer?
Thank you, Kathy. And hello, everyone. I'm Summer Brooks-Smith, and I am the head of CDP services for VitalMetrics. Today, I'm going to be walking you through a live demo of our Scope 3 calculation tool. But first, I'm just going to provide a little bit of background information. So the tool is web-based and interactive and includes all 15 of the Scope 3 categories. It's also compliant with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and CDP methodologies for calculating Scope 3 emissions. The final results are ready for third-party verification, and they're calculated based on robust data and methodology. So in terms of the methodology, the Scope 3 tool strictly follows the Corporate Value Chain Accounting and Reporting Standard as set forth by the GHG Protocol for Scope 3 emissions calculations. A portion of the data that's used by the tool is sourced from the Comprehensive Environmental Data Archive, also known as CEDA, which is a quality life cycle assessment database that has been proven by a broad range of clients since about 2000 including organizations such as the European Commission and the U.S. federal government. So this data is annually updated for accuracy, and then it's also supplemented in the tool by data from a variety of other sources that, as you can see here at the bottom of the slide. And these resources are used to source country-specific data, such as fuel emission factors, average taxi tariff data, and electricity price and emissions factors, which are all utilized in the calculation of your Scope 3 emissions. So just to show a little example of some of this country-specific data that's integrated into the Scope 3 tool, here we're showing a chart of transmission and distribution losses for several countries. Now, the third Scope 3 category is called fuel and energy-related activities, and that includes those indirect emissions that are not covered in either Scope 1 or Scope 2, such as transmission and distribution losses if it hasn't already been included in Scope 1 or 2. So these T&D losses can widely vary by country due to differences in things like infrastructure and technology. And as you can see on the graph here, the U.S. Has about a 6% T&D losses, but maybe a less developed country such as Haiti could see as much as 60% for T&D losses. So if you don't account for these differences, what you can wind up doing is actually overestimating or underestimating the Scope 3 emissions that are associated with your fuel and energy related activities. So these differences are accounted for in the Scope 3 calculation tool. And this would take place during the registration phase based on the country that you would select for your organization. So now we're going to get into the live demo, the main part of our webinar for today. So this screen here shows the login screen when you would go to access the tool. And so if you'll just bear with me for 1 second, I'm going to switch over to my screen share so we can proceed with the live demo. All right. And just a quick note about the tool that it does feature a secure login, and this can only be accessed by approved users. So you can be confident that any sensitive information that you might need to enter on behalf of your organization is protected and can only be accessed by approved users or the VitalMetrics team. So this is the dashboard that once you log in, you will come to this screen. At the top here, we've got Computer Makers, Inc. That is just a demo company that I've created. Today it's going to be an electronic computer manufacturing industry company. And we are also going to consider having a $100 million revenue. Now, these are two key pieces of information that you would enter during the registration phase. So as you can see here, we also have our contact information for the primary contact at your organization, as well as the different modules for the tool. Today, we're just going to be focusing on the Scope 3 emissions module, but there are some other options as well. All right, so let's get in there and get started. Okay, great. So this is the main screen that you come to when entering your Scope 3 emissions sources. It does include all 15 of the Scope 3 categories. One thing that is you might take notice already is that the different circles and different categories are colored differently. So up in the top corner here, we have a legend that indicates whether that category has been started, not started, or if it requires attention. And so just to save time for our demo today, I've actually gone and pre-populated some of the different categories, just so you can kind of get an idea at the end for how the final result might look like. But today, let's start with purchase goods and services and put in some data there for our computer manufacturing company. So the first thing that you will see for each of the categories is you'll first be presented with a series of screening questions. Now, I'm not going to get into too many of the details of the screening questions just yet, but all you need to know for now is that they help determine which of the categories are relevant to your organization in that reporting year and are also to be calculated. And this would be based off of things like your organization's activities or perhaps just whether the data is available for your organization. Additionally, on the left here, we have a navigation pane, so you can jump to different categories as you see fit. And if you're ever confused about what activities might be included in any particular category, you can always go up to this little icon here, click on it, and there'll be a category description. So just to have a little bit of guidance in that sense as well. Okay, so for purchase goods and services, just skipping over these screening questions for now, you have two approaches on how to input data for this category. The first one is called User-Defined Categories, and this is where you would transfer in line items from your general spend ledger for different product categories. And the other approach is called the Typical Priority Categories. So if you click View here, you'll be presented with a list of priority categories that are specific to your industry based on average sectoral data. And so these priority categories are organized based on GHG emissions potential. And additionally, on the side here, you're also provided with a typical range that's, again, based on your industry, as well as the annual revenue that you inputted for the reporting year. So kind of giving a range of what an organization that has an annual revenue similar to yours might be spending in these different categories. So you can use either of these different approaches, or you can use a combination of both. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of both. So let's start with the user-defined categories. So for our computer manufacturing company, one thing that we might have to purchase would be semiconductors. So an additional functionality that we have built into the tool is a dynamic search function for this particular category. And since there's going to be hundreds of different product categories, we've tried to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So instead of having to sort through all those categories, if we want semiconductors, we can simply just type it in here. It presents us with options for our group, and semiconductors, computer and electronic products, and product category one more time, and there we are, semiconductor and related device manufacturing. So we're going to click that, and then we'll just put $1 million in out of our $100 million annual revenue. As you might have seen up here, this is updated as I enter those values. This kind of keeps track on this whole page of how much you've entered and what percentage of your organization's revenue that is. Let's do another one. Let's do cabling, some cables for our computers. So cable, manufacturing, cable, electrical equipment, appliances, and one more time. Great. Communication and energy, wire, and cable manufacturing. So for this, we'll put in $500,000. And maybe let's try a typical priority category for custom computer programming services. And here we'll enter in $3 million. Great, fits right within our range. So typically you would add several more different entries. We recommend that you input about 90% of your total spend from your general spend ledger into your purchase goods and services category for calculation. But for now, let's just save it. And I want to show you another functionality about this tool that is incredibly, can be incredibly useful as you kind of navigate through the different data collection processes. Okay, great. So what this tool has is an in-tool error checking functionality. And so as you can see at the top, it says validation failed, see below for details. So if we scroll down, the tool has actually done an automatic check on the data that we've entered, and it's determined that we have low purchase goods and services spend. So this is because I've only entered 3 different items, which is not making up a representative proportion of what purchase goods and services would typically cost based on our annual revenue. So that's saying it's just a little check to say, hey, you should double check these data points and make sure that they are correct. So let's add another one, and this time I'm going to add an item that may not seem pretty, may not actually be purchased by a computer manufacturer. So let's try some grains, and we'll see what happens there. Just as another demonstration of the errors. So let's put in $50 million for our grain. That's a lot of our $100 million annual revenue, but let's see what happens when we try to save this now. So we've definitely increased the amount of spend that's been entered. So hopefully we shouldn't get that low spend anymore, but we do have another error message. And what does it say? This time, high emission. So we've detected unusually high GHG emissions as compared to the size of your organization's operation. So this is, we put $50 million of our annual revenue towards grain, and based on average sectoral data, the tool has determined that this might be an area that we should double check to make sure that we are accurately inputting our data. However, if, say, your organization has some activities in the reporting year that are outside of the norm, you do have the option to override these errors. So you can hit confirm and accept amounts, and then save that, and you'll be able to, it'll mark your purchase goods and services section as complete, and you can move on to something else. Just one note there about saving is that the tool does allow you to save kind of as you go. So you don't need to sit down and input all of your data at once. You can do whatever categories that you have first, maybe as you're waiting on some more data collection. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so let's move on to another category, such as fuel and energy-related activities. There we go. So this category is a good example of how the tool offers some flexibility in the types of data that you need to input for your Scope 3 calculations. So down here we have a list of our fuel and energy categories, as well as the field for quantity and unit. But if we click on the units, it actually presents with different options. So you can use the monetary unit, or in this case, the physical unit. So let's use kilowatt hours for this. And we'll put in 2 million kilowatt hours. And for gasoline, we have a variety of options as well. And let's do U.S. gallons. And let's do 1,500 U.S. gallons. All right, so we'll just save that, and we'll continue on. But that really can be helpful, when you're in your data collection process so that you have a little bit of flexibility there, and whatever data is more easily accessible, you can use. So another thing I wanted to show today is the tool's ability to offer auto calculations of results for certain categories. So upstream transportation and distribution is a good example of that functionality. So the message that we are presented with here says the GHG emissions associated with your organization's upstream transportation and distribution have been auto-calculated based on sectoral data and your organization's revenue for the reporting year. So the reason that the tool is able to do this is because it carries data on transportation margins for all sectors, so for industry average transportation margins, including air, water, ground, and pipeline transportation. So based on these margins and the revenue of your company, emissions factors are applied to the estimated transportation needs to calculate the estimated associated GHG emissions. So that is one option that you can use. It makes it a little bit simpler on the user's end. However, if you feel that the average sector margins do not apply totally to your organization, you do have the option to refine this category instead. So for the screening question, would you like to further refine this result? You can say yes, and then you're presented with more data fields, and you can enter with your own data that you've collected. But today, let's just take the automatic calculation and move on. So we've covered different categories that are relevant to our particular demo organization. But what if you were presented with a category that is not relevant to your organization? The tool also has the ability to address those as well. So you can kind of have it all marked in one space. So, for example, we're going to look at the investments category, and we will pretend that our computer manufacturing company does not make any investments. So this is where the screening questions start to really come into play. So the first question says, does the amount of your organization investment in other organizations exceed 5% of your annual revenue? So we're going to say no. And so instead of all those other questions for this category, we're presented with an explanation box. And so here you can see that a default message has popped up. But if you want to, you can also just put in your own, our company does not invest in other organizations. I'm also going to just include that default there, but you can use the default, you can enter your own, and then when you save that, that will also be included in the generation of the final results. Since an explanation is needed in the CDP questionnaire for Scope 3, if you're planning on not responding to a particular category, you do need to have an explanation as to why it's not relevant or why it can't be calculated in that reporting year. We'll save that, and we're just going to look at one more category for today. That will be the end-of-life treatment of sold products. And so one other functionality of the tool that some organizations may be interested when they're reporting their Scope 3 is that they may be interested in putting in data that either they've collected themselves, whether they've calculated their emissions for a category internally or engaged a third party, or if they would like to include primary data that they've collected from suppliers that they've been engaging with. So the tool also has the ability to accept that data as well. So, for example, if we wanted to input some primary data, this question 4 here says, have you collected any associated Scope 3 GHG emission data directly from any of your upstream or downstream suppliers? So that's primary data. And if we hit yes, a new box pops up. We can enter the amount of emissions right in the box, and then we can continue to add more of our end-of-life data if we choose. Alternatively, if we have calculated our own GHG emissions for this category, we can say, yes, we'd like to use our own calculated data, and then you can input that right there. So it makes it easy to use the tool for calculations or integrate your own calculated data that you have. So today, let's use our own calculated data. So we'll say we have 150,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll save that. All right, great. And so now you can see all on the navigation pane, all of our circles are green. So let's go take a look at our overview for their Scope 3 emissions. Bear with me for 1 second while it's loading. It's taking all the data that we've entered and doing some calculations in the background. Great. So now our main screen here has started to populate these different fields in a chart that directly resembles the Scope 3 table in the CDP Climate Change Questionnaire. So you've got your list of your emission sources, the evaluation, the amount of emissions, methodology, and so forth. So one thing that you might notice is that these lines have started to fill in green. Now, these represent the relative results of the emissions that are coming from that category, but do please take note that these lines represent the unaudited and unverified results, but they do provide a simple visualization for your reference. So also you can see that the evaluation has changed to relevant and calculated, but if we scroll down to maybe investments, it says not relevant, not calculated. So again, it addresses each of these different categories and directly relates to the response in the CDP questionnaire. So in this column here would be where the values would appear for the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Currently, it's showing up as hashtags. And this is because as part of our VitalMetrics Scope 3 service, we perform additional quality checks on the values that are generated by the tool. And this is because although it does have a robust error checking system, as environmental professionals with years of experience, we run our own quality check just for any of those subtle little errors that maybe the tool might not catch, to make sure that the reporting is as robust as possible. Also, this little button has now popped up under the methodology section. And if you click on that, it provides a full methodology of how the emissions were calculated in that Scope 3 category. So, following the generation of the final report, these methodologies will be included, and you'll be able to directly copy and paste them from that final report into the CDP Climate Change Questionnaire. Additionally, this is where your primary data would pop up if we had entered any. And for those categories that were not relevant and not calculated, here is our little explanation that we popped in. Our company does not invest in other organizations. And then here is another little default message that can be included as well. So if all in all, we have entered our data, everything's looking green, good to go. We've double-checked all of our inputs to make sure that we copy them correctly and that we've addressed any error messages that may popped up. So the last thing that you would do would be to click your Submit button. And once you do that, an email is sent to the VitalMetrics team that says you have finished your data collection process for Scope 3 calculation and you're ready to move on to the next step in the process of the review and quality check. All right, so I'd like to show you guys a couple examples of some of the final deliverables that are generated following the use of this tool. So if you just give me a second, I'm going to switch back to the slides. Great, there we go. Okay, so this is a real example of a final report for a client. And they're typically about 20 pages in length or so and provide Scope 3 results and the calculation methodologies that are ready to copy and paste directly into your CDP climate change questionnaire. Also, for reoccurring clients, we provide a percent change analysis that compares your reporting year's Scope 3 emissions to the previous year's results. The report will also include some data graphics, such as this one. So this is a pie chart that was actually taken from last year's CDP, a final report from a client for CDP. And this particular client was a leading manufacturer of heating and cooling equipment. So you can see on the pie chart that the purchased goods and services category made up the overwhelming majority of the Scope 3 emissions that were reported. Other notable relevant categories were the downstream transportation and distribution, which was at 5%, and the capital goods, which came in at about 3% of the reported Scope 3 emissions. And for this particular client, the whole process only took about 4 weeks, and that was from the signing of the contract to the distribution of the CDP-ready final report. We also worked with this company in their first year of CDP reporting, and in that very first year, they were able to earn a score of A- on their climate change questionnaire, which included their Scope 3 emissions results that were calculated using the Scope 3 calculation tool. So, you know, for their first year, that's a really good achievement, really big achievement, and we were happy to work with them and actually continue to work with them today. So with that, I'm going to conclude our demo, and I'm going to pass it over to our project associate, Whitney Reyes, and she's going to talk a little bit about our VitalMetrics Scope 3 CDP process.
Thank you, Summer. So up to this point, you have learned about the importance of Scope 3 and how our tool functions. So how does the VitalMetrics team carry out Scope 3 projects? The first step of this process involves data collection and input. So this is the part of the process that is completed by you and your organization. Internally, you will collect the necessary data and then input this data into our simple online questionnaire, which is the questionnaire Summer just demoed for us. If you would like assistance during this step of the process, we can provide additional online support via video conferencing. We will also send you how-to videos you can consult along the way. Once the data has been entered, the VitalMetrics Scope 3 tool will process the data and run the emissions calculations. During this step of the process, we also review the data that you entered. After the data has been reviewed and the calculations completed, the VitalMetrics team runs a quality check on the results. We want to just ensure that the calculations are correct and nothing was missed during the second step. Once this is done, we then generate a CDP submission-ready report that includes both the calculations and the methodology and data source descriptions needed by CDP. The descriptions are formatted in a way that can be easily copied and pasted into the CDP report, which is also what Summer showed us on the Scope 3 tool. And overall, this process takes around 3 to 5 weeks for early responders. Our methods for Scope 3 calculations require minimal data collection, which saves your organization time and resources while producing scientifically robust results. So what do our clients say about our service? 9 out of 10 would recommend the tool to others, and they also find our service to be very useful and overall rate our service as excellent. So we'd like to end this presentation with a final poll question. Following this webinar, is your organization more likely to report Scope 3 emissions for this year? So please take the next minute to answer this question on the panel on the right-hand side. It looks like maybe this poll question is not working, but we hope that the number of yeses increase with this round after the presentation. Oh, it looks like the question is up now. So again, do you think your organization will report Scope 3 emissions this year? So if you could answer this question now, that would be great, and we'll review the results in about a minute. Okay, so just a few more seconds here. Well, thank you for answering that question. And as a thank you for attending this webinar and for expressing interest in calculating your organization's Scope 3 emissions, we would like to extend first-year discounts for webinar attendees. So although the deadline for CDP disclosure submission is in June, we encourage early sign-up to provide optimal service and quick turnaround times. So if you would like to follow up on this offer, please include this promotion code listed on the screen when signing up. And just to note, in addition to the CDP service I outlined earlier, VitalMetrics can provide additional meetings and services depending on your organization's needs. For example, prior to the initial data collection phase of the CDP service, we can set up a positioning meeting for your organization that analyzes your company's position in the 2018 CDP landscape. Also, after the finalization of the CDP submission-ready report, we can set up a meeting to go over the report findings and provide you with recommendations on how to optimize your environmental performance going forward. So please contact us via email or through our website if you have any additional questions and to sign up for the webinar special promotion. So again, thank you for joining the webinar today, and we would now like to take the remainder of this time to answer any questions you have. So please send your questions to us via the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen.